I've always believed that the sound of a ringing phone past midnight carries a weight no other noise can match, a promise of something urgent, something alive. That night, the clock had just ticked past 12 when I dialed her number. Her name was Clara, a woman I'd met only once, at a dimly lit cafe where the coffee was bitter and the conversation wasn't. Her voice, though, had stayed with me, soft, steady, like a stream running over smooth stones. I didn't call her for anything grand or profound. I just needed to hear that voice again, to let it pull me out of the tangle of my own thoughts. The line clicked, and she answered. "Hello." Her tone was curious, not annoyed, despite the hour. "It's me," I said, leaning back in a creaky armchair that had been my father's. "I hope I didn't wake you." "You didn't," she replied, and I could almost hear the faint smile in her words. "Couldn't sleep either, huh?" And just like that, we were talking about nothing and everything. The hum of the refrigerator in my kitchen faded as her voice filled the room. She told me about the stray cat she'd fed earlier, how it had stared at her with eyes like tiny moons. I told her about the book I'd been reading, some sprawling mystery I couldn't quite unravel. The minutes slipped by, and for the first time in days, my shoulders loosened. An hour, I told myself. I talked to her for an hour, then hang up, calm enough to sleep. But then I heard it, a sharp knock at the door. My heart jolted. No one knocks at this hour. Not here, not in this quiet corner of the world where the nearest neighbor is half a mile away. Clara's voice paused mid-sentence. "What was that?" she asked. I stood, phone pressed to my ear, and peered through the window. The porch light flickered, casting jagged shadows across the yard. "Someone's here," I muttered, more to myself than to her. The knocking came again, louder, insistent. And then a voice, familiar but out of place. "Open the door, you idiot. It's freezing out here." It was my sister, Lena. But Lena lived 3 states away. Lena hadn't called, hadn't texted, hadn't given me a single hint she was coming. My stomach twisted. Something was wrong. I froze, the phone still pressed to my ear, Clara's breathing, a faint hum on the other end. "Lena," I said, my voice cracking like dry wood. The knocking stopped, replaced by an impatient shuffle of boots on the porch. I glanced at the clock, 1:03 a.m. My sister here, unannounced in the dead of night? It didn't add up. She was the planner, the one who sent calendar invites for family dinners 6 months in advance. This wasn't her style. "Hold on," I whispered to Clara, setting the phone down on the armrest without hanging up. My bare feet hit the cold hardwood as I crossed the room, each step heavier than the last. The air felt thick, charged, like the moment before a storm breaks. I reached the door, hesitated, then turned the lock. Lena stood there, her dark hair plastered to her face by a drizzle I hadn't even noticed starting. Her coat was too thin for the March chill, and her eyes, wild, wide, darting, locked onto mine. "Took you long enough," she snapped, pushing past me into the house without an invitation. She smelled faintly of gasoline and damp earth, an odd combination that made my nose wrinkle. "What are you doing here?" I asked, closing the door against the creeping cold. My mind raced. 3 states. A 6-hour drive, at least. She hadn't texted me since last week, something mundane about her new job. Now she was here, tracking mud across my rug like she owned the place. She didn't answer right away. Instead, she dropped a battered duffel bag onto the floor with a thud that echoed too loudly in the quiet. "I need coffee," she said, heading for the kitchen. "And don't ask questions yet." "I'm not ready." I stood there, dumbfounded, watching her disappear around the corner. The phone on the chair buzzed faintly. Clara, still waiting. I grabbed it, my thumb hovering over the end call button, but something stopped me. "Hey," I said softly into the receiver. My sister just showed up. Out of nowhere. I'll call you back, okay? Is everything all right?" Clara's voice was laced with concern now, sharp enough to cut through my haze. "I don't know," I admitted. "I'll let you know." I hung up, the silence swallowing her reply. From the kitchen, I heard the clatter of a mug hitting the counter. Lena was muttering to herself, words I couldn't catch, but the tone was jagged, frayed. I took a deep breath and followed her, the weight of her sudden arrival pressing down on me like a stone. Whatever this was, it wasn't a casual visit, and I had a sinking feeling I wasn't going to like what came next. The kitchen light buzzed faintly as I stepped in, a harsh yellow glow that made Lena look paler than she should have. She stood by the counter, fumbling with the coffee pot, her hands shaking just enough to rattle the glass against the machine. She didn't look up at me, didn't acknowledge the questions piling up in the air between us. The duffel bag sat slumped by the doorway like a tired dog, its zipper half open, spilling a corner of something red. A scarf, maybe, or a shirt. "Lena," I said, keeping my voice steady, "what's going on? You can't just barge in here at 1 in the morning and act like it's normal." She snorted, a sharp, humorless sound, and poured water into the coffee maker with a slosh that missed half the mark. "Normal," she muttered. "Like anything's normal anymore." She slammed the pot into place and jabbed the start button, the machine gurgling to life. Only then did she turn to face me, leaning against the counter with her arms crossed tight, like she was holding herself together. Her eyes were red-rimmed, not from crying. Lena didn't cry, not even when we buried Dad, but from something else. Exhaustion, maybe, or fear. "I drove straight through," she said finally. "Didn't stop except for gas. Didn't call because," she trailed off, her gaze flicking to the window above the sink, where the rain streaked the glass in thin, restless lines. "Because what?" I pressed, stepping closer. The floor creaked under me, and she flinched, actually flinched like I'd shouted. That wasn't Lena. She'd once stared down a guy twice her size who'd cut her off in traffic, cool as ice. Now she looked like a cornered animal. "I didn't want it traced," she said, so quiet I almost missed it. "The call. My phone's off. Dead, actually. Threw it out somewhere in Ohio." My stomach dropped. "Traced? By who?" "Lena, what the hell are you mixed up in?" She opened her mouth, then closed it again, her jaw tightening. The coffee maker hissed, filling the silence with its bitter steam. She reached into her coat pocket and pulled out a crumpled pack of cigarettes. Another surprise. She'd quit years ago. "Not yet," she said, tapping one out but not lighting it. "I need to think. I need you to trust me for 5 minutes, okay? Just 5. I stared at her, the sister I thought I knew dissolving into someone else. The cigarette trembled between her fingers. Outside, the wind picked up, rattling the window pane. And in that moment, I realized 2 things. 1, she wasn't just running from something, she was running to me. And 2, whatever she brought with her, it was already in this house. I didn't say anything for a moment, just watched her twist that unlit cigarette between her fingers like it was a lifeline. The coffee maker sputtered to a stop, the scent of burnt grounds curling through the kitchen. Lena's eyes flicked to the duffel bag again, then back to me, quick and sharp, like she was testing how much I'd noticed. Too much, probably. I wasn't blind. That bag wasn't just luggage. It was heavy, deliberate, the way it hit the floor earlier echoing in my head. 5 minutes, I said finally, crossing my arms to mirror her stance. "But you're not dodging me after that. You show up like this, you owe me something." She nodded, a jerky little motion, and pushed off the counter to pour herself a mug of coffee. Her hands steadied a bit with something to do, but the tension in her shoulders didn't budge. I stayed where I was, leaning against the doorway, my mind spinning. Trace calls. Dead phones. Ohio. It sounded like a bad movie, the kind we'd mock over popcorn on lazy Sundays. Except this was real, and it was my sister, and I didn't have a script to follow. She took a sip, grimaced, too hot or too bitter, I couldn't tell, then set the mug down and turned to the bag. "I need to check something," she said, more to herself than me, and knelt beside it. The zipper rasped as she tugged it open wider, revealing more of that red fabric. A jacket, I realized now, stained with something dark along the sleeve. My breath caught, but before I could ask, she dug deeper, pulling out a small metal box, no bigger than a paperback. It was dented, scratched, with a cheap padlock hanging off one side. "What's that?" I asked, my voice sharper than I meant it to be. She didn't answer right away. She just sat back on her heels, staring at the box like it might bite her. Then she said, "It's why I'm here." Her fingers brushed the lock, hesitant, like she wasn't sure she wanted to open it, or couldn't, without a key I didn't see. "I didn't plan this," you know? Coming to you. It just happened. Lena, you're not making sense. I stepped forward, close enough to see the faint tremble in her hands again. What's in the box? Why are you scared of your own phone? She looked up at me, and for a split second, I saw something raw in her eyes. Panic, guilt, maybe both. I took it, she said, from someone who shouldn't have had it. And now they're looking for me. The room seemed to shrink, the walls pressing in as her words sank deep. Outside, the rain hammered harder, a drum roll to whatever she wasn't saying. I glanced at the box, then back at her. Who's they? I asked, but my gut already knew. Whoever it was, they weren't far behind. Lena didn't answer my question right away. She stood up, clutching the metal box to her chest like it was a shield, her knuckles whitening around its edges. The kitchen felt smaller now, the air thick with coffee fumes and something heavier, dread, maybe, or the weight of whatever she wasn't telling me. I waited, my pulse ticking up with every second she stayed silent. They're people I don't know, she said at last, her voice low, like she was afraid the walls might hear. Not by name, anyway, but I saw them, back at the motel in Ohio. 2 of them, in a black car, watching me through the window while I checked out. I didn't think much of it then, just creeps, you know? But when I hit the road, they followed. Followed you? I echoed, stepping closer. For how long? Hours. She swallowed, her gaze darting to the window again. The rain blurred the glass, turning the night outside into a smear of shadows. I lost them somewhere around the state line, I think. Took back roads, double back once. But I don't know if they're still out there. I moved to the window, peering out into the dark. The porch light flickered again, weak against the downpour, illuminating nothing but wet grass and the gravel drive stretching into the black. No headlights, no movement, just the storm. But her words had lodged in me like splinters. A black car, hours of pursuit, and that box, dented and locked, sitting between us like a loaded gun. Lena, I said, turning back to her, what did you take? What's worth all this? She set the box on the counter with a soft clunk, her fingers lingering on it before pulling away. I don't even know everything that's in it, she admitted. Papers, mostly. Some kind of ledger. Names, numbers, dates. And something else, a key, maybe? I didn't look long. I just grabbed it and ran. Ran from where? I pressed, my patience thinning. You're not giving me enough here. From work, she snapped, then bit her lip like she'd said too much. She ran a hand through her damp hair, pacing a tight circle. The new job. It's complicated. I was supposed to file some old records, clean out a storage room. That's where I found it, hidden in a wall behind a loose panel. I wasn't even looking for it, but once I saw it, I couldn't just leave it there. Why not? I asked, though part of me already knew the answer. Lena had always had a nose for trouble, curiosity sharper than sense. Because it wasn't right, she said fiercely. The names in there, some of them I recognized. People who've gone missing. People from the news. And the numbers, they weren't accounts or inventory. They were bigger. Too big. The room went quiet, save for the rain's steady thrum. Missing people. Ledgers. A key. My mind churned, piecing it together, but the picture was still blurry. I looked at the box again, its scratched surface glinting under the kitchen light. Whatever she'd stumbled into, it wasn't small. And if those men in the black car were real, it wasn't over. Then from somewhere down the drive, I heard it, a low rumble, faint but growing. Not thunder. An engine. The rumble cut through the patter of the rain like a knife, low and steady, creeping closer. I whipped around to the window again, my breath fogging the glass as I pressed my face to it. The porch light was useless now, swallowed by the storm, but I could just make out a pair of headlights slicing through the dark at the far end of the drive. They bobbed slightly, tires crunching gravel, moving slow but deliberate. Lena, I said, my voice tight, is that them? She was at my side in an instant, the metal box still clutched in her arms. Her breath hitched as she peered out, her shoulder brushing mine. I don't know, she whispered. Maybe. I didn't get a good look at the car, just that it was dark. Black or navy, something like that. The headlights paused, idling maybe 100 yards out, twin beams cutting through the rain like searchlights. My heart slammed against my ribs. Could be a neighbor, I told myself. Old man Carter sometimes drove out this way when the roads flooded closer to town. But Carter's truck wheezed like a dying horse. This engine purred, smooth and controlled. Not Carter. Not anyone I knew. Turn off the lights, Lena hissed, already moving. She darted to the kitchen switch and flicked it off, plunging us into shadow. I followed suit, hitting the living room lamp with a clumsy swipe. The house went dark, save for the faint glow of the porch bulb leaking through the curtains. We stood there, frozen, listening as the engine idled, a low growl underscoring the storm. "What do we do?" I asked, keeping my voice barely above a breath. My hands felt useless, hanging at my sides, itching for something to hold on to. She didn't answer right away. Her eyes were locked on the window, the box pressed so tight to her chest I thought she might crush it. Then the headlights shifted, tilted like the car was turning. For a wild second, I thought it might peel off, retreat back into the night. But no, it straightened again, creeping closer, maybe 50 yards now. Close enough that I could hear the faint splash of tires through puddles. "We need to hide it," she said suddenly, glancing at the box. "If it's them, they'll want this. Not us. Just this. Hide it where?" I snapped, panic sharpening my words. "And what if they don't care about just this? What if they come in here?" "They won't," she said, but it sounded more like a hope than a promise. She spun around, scanning the room, then bolted for the pantry door. "Here, behind the shelves. Help me." I hesitated, my eyes flicking back to the window. The headlights were still there, unmoving now, like the driver was waiting, watching. Every nerve in me screamed to run, to grab her and get out the back door, but where would we go? The woods behind the house were thick, soaked, no cover for miles. No, she was right. We had to stay, had to play this out. I crossed the kitchen in 3 strides and yanked the pantry open, the hinges squeaking louder than I liked. She shoved past me, dropping to her knees to wedge the box behind a stack of canned goods. I grabbed a sack of flour and piled it in front, my hands shaking as I tried to make it look natural. The engine outside revved once. A short, sharp sound, then went quiet. Dead quiet. No rumble, no gravel crunch. Just the rain and the thud of my own pulse. "Did they leave?" I whispered, creeping back to the window. Lena joined me, her breath ragged. We stared into the dark, the headlights gone, the drive empty again. But the silence felt wrong, too heavy, too still. Then, from the porch, came a single, slow creak. A footstep. The creak hit me like a punch, sharp and real, rooting me to the spot by the window. Lena's hand clamped onto my arm, her grip tight enough to bruise, but I barely felt it. My eyes strained against the dark, searching the porch through the rain-streaked glass. The light out there flickered again, weak and useless, but it caught something, a shadow, tall and lean, shifting just beyond the edge of the glow. Someone was there. "Get down," I hissed, pulling Lena with me as I dropped below the windowsill. We crouched against the wall, the cold seeping through my shirt from the floorboards. Her breathing was shallow, fast, like a rabbit caught in a snare. The metal box was out of sight, tucked away in the pantry, but it might as well have been glowing for how loud it screamed in my head. Another creak, closer now, deliberate. Whoever it was, they weren't rushing. They were testing the boards, feeling their way toward the door. I pictured the lock, old, flimsy, the kind you could jimmy with a credit card if you knew how. Dad had meant to replace it years ago. Never got around to it. "Whoever they are, they're not knocking," I whispered, my mouth dry. "That's not good, right?" Lena shook her head, her eyes wide and glassy in the dim. "They don't knock if they think they don't have to," she said, barely audible. "If it's them, they'll just come in." I cursed under my breath, my mind racing for options. The back door was through the kitchen, past the pantry. Too far, too exposed. The stairs to the second floor were closer. But what then? Hide under the bed, like kids playing a game? No weapons in the house. Either. Not unless you counted the kitchen knives, and I wasn't about to stab anyone. Not yet. The doorknob rattled, a soft metallic clink that made my stomach lurch. Lena flinched, pressing herself flatter against the wall. I held my breath, waiting for the click of the lock giving way, the crash of the door swinging open. But it didn't come. Instead, there was a pause, long, heavy, suffocating. Then a voice, low and muffled through the wood. "You in there, sweetheart." A man's voice, calm, almost friendly, but with an edge that turned my blood cold. He wasn't shouting, wasn't demanding, just talking like he knew we were listening, like he had all the time in the world. Lena's nails dug into my arm. "That's not for me," she breathed, so quiet I barely caught it. "He doesn't know I'm here. He's guessing." "Guessing?" I shot back, keeping my voice a whisper. "He's at my door, Lena. Who the hell is he?" She didn't answer, just shook her head again, her lips pressed tight. The knob rattled once more, then stopped. Footsteps again, slow, retreating, the porch groaning under the weight. I risked a peek, lifting my head just enough to see through the bottom of the window. The shadow was moving back toward the edge of the porch, then down the steps, melting into the rain. A moment later, the engine roared to life again, closer than I'd thought, parked just out of sight. Headlights flared, swung wide, and then faded as the car rolled back down the drive. I let out a shaky breath, my legs aching from crouching. "He's gone," I said, more to convince myself than her. For now. Lena didn't move, didn't relax. "He'll be back," she said, her voice flat, certain. "Or someone else will. They don't stop." I turned to her, the weight of her words sinking in. "Then we need to figure out what's in that box," I said. "Right now." I didn't wait for Lena to argue. I stood, my knees popping from the strain, and crossed to the pantry in 3 quick strides. The darkness made it harder to navigate, but I didn't dare turn the lights back on. Not yet. Not with that car still fresh in my mind. My hands fumbled over the sack of flour, shoving it aside, then yanked the metal box free from its hiding spot. It was heavier than it looked, cold against my palms, the dents rough under my fingers. Lena was behind me in an instant, her shadow merging with mine in the faint glow seeping through the curtains. "What are you doing?" she hissed, her voice sharp with alarm. "What we should have done the second you got here," I shot back, setting the box on the kitchen counter with a dull thud. "We're opening it. Now." She grabbed my wrist, her grip surprisingly strong. "We can't. Not yet. You don't know what's." "I know enough." I cut her off, pulling free. "Some guy to try my door at 2 in the morning, Lena. You're running from people who don't knock. Whatever's in here, it's not staying a mystery." I tapped the padlock with my knuckle, the sound hollow and final. "You got a key? Or do I need to find a hammer?" Her jaw tightened, but she didn't fight me this time. She reached in her coat pocket and pulled out a thin metal pin. Not a key, but a makeshift pick, bent and scratched like she'd used it before. "Fine," she said, her voice low. "But don't say I didn't warn you." She knelt beside the counter, working the pin into the lock with quick, practiced movements. I watched, my pulse still racing, the silence of the house pressing in around us. The rain had softened to a drizzle, a faint tap-tap against the roof, but every creak of the floorboards made me flinch, half expecting that shadow to reappear at the door. The lock clicked, a small, triumphant sound, and Lena hesitated, her hand hovering over the lid. "Last chance," she said, glancing up at me. "You sure?" "Open it," I said, my throat tight. She lifted the lid, the hinges squeaking faintly. Inside, the box was stuffed tight, papers, yellowed and creased, spilling over the edges, a small brass key, tarnished but solid, and a folded cloth, dark and stiff, like it had been soaked in something and left to dry. Lena pulled the papers out first, spreading them on the counter. I leaned in, squinting in the dim light. Names, dates, numbers, rows of them, handwritten in a tight, jagged scrawl. Some names I didn't recognize, but others hit me like a slap. "Margaret Hensley," I read aloud, my voice catching. "She went missing last year. They found her car by the river, empty." Lena nodded, her face grim. "Keep going." I scanned further. "Thomas Rourke. Disappeared 2 summers ago." And wait. My fingers stopped on a name near the bottom. "Clara Vance." The room tilted. Clara. My Clara from the phone call, the voice that had kept me steady an hour ago. I looked at Lena, my chest tightening. This can't be right. She's fine. I just talked to her. Lena's eyes widened, a flicker of something, fear, maybe, crossing her face. "You what?" Before I could answer, The phone on the armchair buzzed, cutting through the silence like a scream. We both froze, staring at it. The screen lit up, glowing in the dark. Caller ID, Clara. The phone's buzz sliced through the quiet, relentless, each vibration rattling the armrest. Clara's name glowed on the screen, stark against the dark, and for a moment, I couldn't move. My hand hovered over it, the air in the room thickening with every unanswered ring. Lena stared at me, her face pale, the papers from the box still clutched in her hands. "You said you talked to her?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper, like she was afraid the phone might hear. "Yeah," I said, swallowing hard. "An hour ago. She was fine. I trailed off, the memory of her voice, so calm, so steady, clashing with the name scrawled on that ledger. Clara Vance. Missing. My Clara? It didn't make sense. I grabbed the phone, my thumb hovering over the answer button. "I need to know." "Don't," Lena snapped, lunging forward, but I was faster. I hit accept and pressed it to my ear, my heart hammering. "Clara," I said, my voice rougher than I meant it to be. Silence on the other end, just a faint crackle like wind through an open line. Then her voice, soft and familiar, but off, somehow. "Hey," she said. "You okay?" "You didn't call back." I exhaled, relief flooding me for a split second, until I caught Lena's eyes, wide and urgent, mouthing hang up. "Yeah, I'm fine," I said, forcing calm into my tone. "Lena showed up like I told you. It's been a mess. Another pause, longer this time. "I'm good," she said, but there was a hitch in her words, a faint echo I hadn't noticed before. "Just wanted to check on you." "It's late, huh?" "Yeah," I said, my grip tightening on the phone. Something was wrong. Her voice, the timing, that list. "Where are you right now?" The line crackled again. "Home," she said, too quick. "In bed. Rain's keeping me up." I glanced out the window. The drizzle had stopped here, the night still and clear now. My stomach twisted. "Rain?" I asked, testing her. "Still coming down where you are?" "A beat." "Yes," she said, and I heard it then, a faint hum in the background, not wind, not static. "An engine. Listen, I'll let you go. Talk tomorrow." "Sure." I lie, my mouth dry. "Night, Clara." The call ended before I could say more, the screen going dark in my hand. I set it down, slow, deliberate, and turned to Lena. "She's lying," I said. "She's not home." I heard a car. Lena's face hardened, her fingers crumpling the edge of the paper. "She's on that list," she said. "If she's calling you now, after I got here, after that guy at the door," she didn't finish, but she didn't have to. The pieces were snapping together, jagged and wrong. "You think she's with them?" I asked, the words tasting sour. "Clara? She's not. She wouldn't." "I don't know," Lena cut in sharp. "But she's not missing, and she's not safe. That list, it's not just victims. It's players. People they've hooked in, one way or another." I stared at the box, the key and cloth still untouched inside. My mind reeled, replaying every word Clara had said tonight, every pause. Had she known about Lena? Had she been fishing? The phone call that had steadied me an hour ago, now felt like a trap tightening around us. Then, from the woods behind the house, a branch snapped, loud, close, deliberate. Lena grabbed my arm. "They're here," she whispered, "and they're not guessing anymore." The snap from the woods jolted us both, a crack that wasn't the wind or the storm settling. Lena's grip on my arm tightened, her nails digging in as we crouched low again, the kitchen counter shielding us from the windows. My pulse roared in my ears, drowning out the silence that followed. Too silent now, the kind that presses down before something breaks loose. "They're circling," she whispered, her voice trembling but steady. "They know I'm here." The call. Clara must have tipped them off. Clara wouldn't. I started, but the words died in my throat. I didn't know anymore. The list, her voice, that engine hum, it all twisted together, a knot I couldn't untangle. I grabbed the box from the counter, shoving the papers, key, and cloth back inside, slamming the lid shut. "We can't stay here." "Where do we go?" Lena asked, her eyes darting to the back door, then the stairs. "They've got the drive covered, and the woods." Another snap, closer, from the side of the house now. Footsteps, muffled by wet grass, but unmistakable. My chest tightened. They weren't rushing in. Not yet, but they were closing the net. I thought the car at the door, the man's voice, Clara's call. They weren't guessing. They were hunting. The attic, I said, the idea hitting me fast. There's a hatch in the hall closet. Old ladder, but it works. We can hide a box up there by time. Lena nodded, quick and sharp, and we moved, silent, low, the box tucked under my arm. The hall was dark, the closet door a shadow among shadows. I eased it open, wincing at the faint creak, and pulled the ladder down, its rungs cold and dusty under my hands. Go, I whispered, shoving the box at her. She climbed, fast, the wood groaning softly under her weight. I followed, pulling the ladder up behind me and shutting the hatch with a quiet thud. The attic was cramped, musty, littered with old boxes and insulation that scratched at my skin. We wedged ourselves behind a stack of crates, the metal box between us, our breathing shallow and synced. Below, the house was still. No footsteps, no voices, but I knew it wouldn't last. What now? Lena murmured, her face barely visible in the gloom. I pulled the brass key from the box, turning it over in my fingers. This, I said, it's got to mean something. If we figure out what it unlocks, maybe we can. A crash cut me off, glass shattering downstairs, sharp and violent. Lena gasped, clapping a hand over her mouth. Footsteps followed, heavy, deliberate, moving through the kitchen. A man's voice, the same one from the porch, drifted up through the floorboards. Check the back. She's here somewhere. Another voice answered, gruffer. What about the brother? Collateral, the first said, casual as if he were ordering coffee. Boss wants the box. Rest doesn't matter. My blood ran cold. Collateral. I looked at Lena, her eyes wide with terror, and gripped the key tighter. We weren't hiding anymore. We were trapped. But then I saw it. A small, rusted lockbox in the corner of the attic, half buried under a tarp. Dad's old keepsake chest. The key's size, its shape, it matched. I crawled over, shoving the tarp aside, and jammed the key into the lock. It turned with a click, the lid popping open. Inside, a single sheet of paper, yellowed, handwritten, a map with coordinates and a name. Clara Vance. Below it, in Dad's scrawl, trust no one. Run. The footsteps were on the stairs now, closing in. Lena grabbed my arm. What is it? Proof, I said, my voice shaking. And a way out. We're not waiting for them. I stuffed the map in my pocket, grabbed the box, and kicked the attic window open, the night air rushing in. The roof sloped sharp, wet from the rain, but beyond it, the woods a chance. Jump, I said, and we did, into the dark, into whatever came next, with the truth burning a hole in my chest and the hunters right behind us. The end.